Welcome, this is Pastor Luis here, and welcome to our historic and beautiful sanctuary at the Rhinebeck Reformed Church. We're going to share a few moments of discussion centered on positive theology, and today's topic is, why do we suffer? That is the central question that is volleying in many of our minds, and I'm going to offer two perspectives, one which will come from a story that some of you may have heard before, but I hope that when you hear it again, it gives you a new layer of meaning as to the central question in our minds, why do we suffer? About 150 years ago, a man by the name of Alfred Wallace lived. He was based out of England. He was a botanist. One day, the story goes that he was in his laboratory, and he noticed that there was a beautiful emperor butterfly struggling to emerge from its cocoon. Intuitively, he did what many of us would do. He used his scalpel and tried to assist the butterfly in order to make it pry loose and fly within the tank. Unbeknownst to him, in so doing that, he frustrated the process of growth. That butterfly needed to struggle to be able to experience the suffering and pain that goes with the process of stretching itself and pulling and pushing, doing all the work on its own in order to become free. Wallace wondered what would happen if I assisted the butterfly, and he did. And as he did that, he noticed what happened to the butterfly. In his own words, the butterfly emerged from the cocoon, it spread its wings, and it dropped precipitously and died. In varying degrees, many of us can see ourselves in the story. We all need to struggle, we all need to experience pain in order to experience the breakthroughs that come from the process of suffering. Otherwise, the juices in the story of the butterfly would not have been distributed beautifully into the large wings of the butterfly and allow it to become what nature constituted that butterfly to be. Without all the pain, there would be no beauty, no color, and no life, which is one of the perspectives that I wish to advance in posing the question, why do we suffer? Struggle and pain are necessary in order to create a beautiful and living creature. Many of us have been gripped by the fear centered on the coronavirus. But in the face of all the pain that we're suffering as a nation, we have also been uplifted by the beautiful human interest stories that have emerged. Take, for example, the amount of medical students which have placed their studies on pause in order to provide daycare support to the scores of nurses and doctors who need to be at the front lines treating coronavirus victims. Also think about the neighbors who are going out of their way in order to shop for other neighbors who may have underlying medical concerns and are afraid of going to a pharmacy or a supermarket in order to pick up staples and keep themselves going. Think about the churches which have repurposed themselves and rather than holding services, which we can't, but are now worshiping in other ways by communing with human beings in the form of giving food products through pantry ministries and the community. The list goes on and on. In the face of the suffering that we are experiencing as a community, as a nation, and as individuals, we have seen the beauty, the richness and color that has emerged from each of our lives in the face of our suffering. A second perspective comes from one of my favorite writers in the Bible, Paul. Paul said the memorable words, "We boast of our sufferings." Now, many of us would think that Paul said those words during a time of comfortable existence. But Paul was a man who was constantly afflicted by one thing or the other, whether it was a physical illness which constantly afflicted him and didn't allow him to go full speed in life, whether it was being unfairly targeted politically or thrown into prison on bogus charges. Paul was the man who knew his share of suffering. But in the face of his suffering, he was able to come up with some of the more memorable words that we use in our New Testament canon, including the ones that I just evoked from the book of Romans, we boast in our sufferings. I think it's worth noting that he used the Greek word kaxoamai, which means to keep our head high. So in the face of the suffering that we are experiencing as individuals and as a nation, one of the things that we can do in order to keep forward in the process of life is to keep our head high, to keep a good mental attitude, to elevate each other's moods with positive words, with a positive spirit in order to deal with the suffering that we are grappling with. Now, Paul's words, "we boast of our sufferings," may sound a little proudful, may sound a little masochistic, and is actually antithetical to everything that we believe in as a society that believes in a positive attitude and feeling good about ourselves. But it's really not. Paul is saying that our suffering contains something that is valuable, golden, precious, and rich. We should be happy to embrace our trials because they produce the endurance and strength that we will need in order to proceed forward in this process that we call life. All our hard work makes us greater and it builds character. Now think about that for a moment. Some of the perspectives that you employ during moments in which you need to lean on when you feel vulnerable does not come from a good book or from a comfortable existence. Quite often, more and not, the kernels of wisdom that we evoke when we're feeling vulnerable comes from those moments in which we have passed through the furnace of human suffering. So Paul's words come to us from that place, a place of suffering, and we remember his words during this time in which we are asking ourselves, why do we suffer? Well, Paul reminds us, keep your head high, we boast in our sufferings. Amen. Now I end this portion of my moment of reflection and practical theology by deferring to the beautiful music played by Sally Hitchcock.